There's a quiet moment in life when you realize you've spent too much time trying to be what the world expected, while forgetting to listen to the most important voice of all. It's not a dramatic moment. There are no applause, no external signs. It's just an internal feeling, almost imperceptible, that something inside you is asking for attention. Vincent Peale said that most people live far below their potential, not because of a lack of ability, but because they don't understand who they really are. And it all begins right here, in the deep understanding of I am. For a long time, you may have defined yourself by circumstances, by what went right or wrong, by what others said about you, by what you lost, by what you haven't yet achieved. Without realizing it, you allowed the external world to write your identity. But Peale taught that what you accept as truth about yourself becomes the invisible foundation of your entire life. The I am that you silently repeat, even without realizing it, shapes your choices, your courage, your faith, and even your limits. When you internally say, I am weak, your mind begins to look for proof of it. When you say, I am incapable, the world seems to confirm it, not because the universe is against you, but because your mind begins to operate obediently to this order. Peale was clear in stating that thought is not merely a reflection of reality, but a creative force. What you affirm internally, you begin to live externally, and that is why understanding the I am is not an abstract spiritual concept. It is a practical key to reorganizing your life. Perhaps you learned early on to present yourself as someone who can endure anything but doesn't believe in themselves, or someone who always expects the worst to avoid disappointment, or someone who diminishes themselves before the world does. These postures seem like protection, but they are invisible prisons. Peale taught that the first step to inner liberation is to replace negative definitions with conscious and truthful affirmations, not as an illusion, but as alignment with your true potential. When you begin to understand the I am, something silently changes. You realize that you are not just what you feel on a bad day. You are not just what you failed at in the past. You are not just the story they told you. You begin to see that there is a deeper, more stable and powerful identity within you, an identity that does not depend on external approval. This recognition does not eliminate challenges, but it completely changes the way you face them. Peale spoke a lot about practical faith, the kind that doesn't wait for perfect circumstances to exist. Faith that begins as an internal decision. Understanding I am is consciously choosing who you decide to be, regardless of the current scenario. It's affirming internally, I am capable, even when you still feel fear. I am guided, even when you don't see the complete path. I am enough, even when the world remains silent. This process doesn't happen all at once. It begins with small internal adjustments, with attention to the silent dialogue you maintain with yourself, with the courage to interrupt automatic thoughts that diminish your strength. Peale taught that the mind accepts repetition as truth. What you repeat, it begins to execute. Therefore, each conscious affirmation of I am functions as a new command, gradually reprogramming your internal state. Perhaps you are at a point in your life where you feel invisible, tired, or unmotivated. If so, this is not a sign of failure. It's an invitation to turn inward and ask, who am I silently saying I am every day? Because as long as you don't consciously choose that identity, the world will choose it for you, and it almost never chooses it kindly. Understanding the I am is about reclaiming your center. It's about ceasing to live reacting to circumstances and beginning to act from inner convictions. It doesn't mean denying difficulties, but facing them with a more solid foundation. When you change the I am, you change your posture, you change your energy, you change your decisions, and over time, you change the results. This is the beginning of the journey, not an external journey, but an internal one. And everything that follows depends on this first silent recognition. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to affirm as truth from now on. When a message finds you exactly where you are, it's no coincidence. It's a sign of inner readiness. This channel exists for those who wish to better understand their own minds, apply faith in daily life, and take responsibility for their own growth. If you feel the time has come to strengthen your consciousness, follow the channel and keep moving forward. Once you begin to perceive the silent power of I am, a second, even deeper understanding emerges. It's not enough to recognize that your thoughts influence your life. You need to understand that faith, when aligned with I am, ceases to be a distant wish and becomes an active force. Vincent Peale taught that faith is not passively waiting for change, but internally assuming a position of trust before any external evidence appears. Many people believe they first need to feel confident before acting. Peale completely reversed this logic. He stated that confidence is born from the internal decision to believe, not from circumstances. When you affirm I am confident, even amidst insecurity, you are training your mind to operate on a new pattern. Practical faith begins precisely there, when you decide not to allow fear to dictate your identity. The most common mistake is treating I am as a superficial affirmation, something repeated without emotional involvement. Peale warned that empty affirmations do not transform. What transforms is progressive conviction, built through conscious repetition combined with action. When you affirm I am guided and act as someone who trusts, even with small steps, your mind begins to accept this identity as real. Faith ceases to be theory and becomes experience. Perhaps you were taught to associate faith only with moments of despair or need, but Peale saw faith as a continuous state of inner alignment, a way of thinking, feeling, and acting. When the I am is aligned with faith, you stop trading your confidence with fear. You understand that doubt may arise, but it doesn't need to control your decisions. There is a profound difference between saying, I hope it works out, and affirming internally, I am capable of handling whatever comes. The first phrase places your peace in the hands of chance. The second places your stability within yourself. Peale taught that true security does not come from the absence of problems, but from the inner certainty that you have the spiritual and mental resources to overcome them. When you begin to live from the I am perspective, something curious happens. External situations don't always change immediately, but your reaction does. And this internal change alters the sequence of events. People start responding differently. Opportunities arise where there were previously blockages. Not by magic, but because your internal posture has changed. Your mind has begun to operate with more clarity. Your communication has become firmer. Your decisions more aligned. Practical faith demands consistency. It's not a state of elevated emotion all the time. There are days of tiredness, doubt, and silence. Peale never promised a life without challenges. He taught how to navigate them without losing your center. The I am acts as an anchor. When everything seems unstable, you return to it. I am sustained. I am able to learn from this. I am stronger than this moment. These affirmations don't eliminate effort, but they organize internal energy so that effort is constructive, not desperate. Practical faith doesn't paralyze, it directs. When you understand this, you stop waiting for external signs to feel secure. You become the source of that security. Over time, you realize that many of the limitations you believed were imposed by the world were, in fact, unconscious internal agreements. The good news is that agreements can be revised. The I am is the point where this revision begins. It's not a shout. It's not a public statement. It's a silent decision to stop defining yourself by scarcity and start aligning yourself with possibility. Peale said that the mind needs to be trained with the same discipline as the body. The I am is the daily exercise of this discipline, not to deny reality, but to transform it from within. When you live this way, faith ceases to be a distant concept and becomes a constant stance towards life. And perhaps this is the greatest lesson here. When you truly understand the I am, you realize you're not trying to become someone new. You're simply removing layers of fear that have hidden who you've always been. This understanding makes no noise, but it changes everything. Once you begin to understand the I am and align that recognition with practical faith, an inevitable confrontation arises. Fear, which has long silently commanded your decisions, begins to resist. Vincent Peale taught that fear doesn't disappear simply because you've decided to believe in something greater. It needs to be consciously replaced. And this replacement begins when the I am starts to speak louder than the internal narratives of threat and limitation. For years, perhaps you've allowed fear to be the dominant voice in your mind. Fear of making mistakes, of disappointing, of losing, of not being enough. This fear disguises itself as prudence, realism, caution. But in practice, it silently shapes your identity. You begin to think less, to try less, to expect less. Peale warned that fear not only paralyzes action, it corrodes self-confidence and weakens faith. When you internally affirm, I am guided, I am capable, I am supported, fear doesn't disappear instantly, but it loses authority. It ceases to be the final decision, and that changes everything. Fear may continue to whisper, but now there is a deeper voice that answers. This answer doesn't come from the emotion of the moment, but from a cultivated conviction. Peale explained that the human mind functions like a field that accepts the dominant seed. If you repeatedly plant fear, you will reap insecurity. If you plant faith, you will reap progressive courage. The I am is the most direct way to plant this new seed. Every time you consciously affirm a strengthened identity, you are training your mind to operate from confidence, not threat. Perhaps you are at a point in life where you know what you need to do, but you are afraid to act. This doesn't mean you haven't understood the I am. It simply means you are in the process of replacement. Peale said that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. When the I am is aligned with faith, you don't wait to feel ready. You act and allow confidence to build in the movement. This is a crucial point in the journey. Many people believe they have failed spiritually because they still feel fear. But Peale saw fear as a natural stage of growth. The problem is not feeling fear. The problem is letting it define who you are. When you say, I am strong even when afraid, something reorganizes itself internally. You stop fighting fear and start walking above it. Over time, you realize that many decisions you postponed didn't require perfection, just presence. Fear exaggerates risks, creates unrealistic scenarios, and paralyzes you. The I am brings you back to the present moment. It reminds you that you don't need to control everything, just trust enough to take the next step. Peale emphasized that true faith doesn't eliminate effort, but it eliminates despair. When I am becomes the primary voice of your mind, you begin to notice subtle changes. Your body posture changes. Your tone of voice changes. Your choices cease to be defensive. You no longer live trying to avoid the worst, but building the best possible within the current conditions. This is not naivete. It is emotional and spiritual maturity. This process requires inner vigilance. Old thoughts try to return. Doubts arise. The world continues to test your confidence. But now you have a center to which you can return. Whenever you notice fear taking over, you can interrupt and reaffirm who you choose to be. Not as a denial of reality, but as an affirmation of your ability to face it. Peale said that inner peace doesn't come when everything is resolved, but when you trust enough not to panic about what is yet to come. When I am replaces fear as the main voice, you begin to live from within, not reacting to the world, but responding to it with clarity. This is one of the clearest signs of real transformation. As the I am strengthens and fear loses ground, another pattern begins to silently dissolve: emotional dependence. Norman Vincent Peale observed that many people do not suffer from a lack of love, but from a lack of self-confidence. They seek outside what they have not yet learned to affirm within, and the I am is the point where this dynamic begins to change. For a long time, perhaps you conditioned your worth on the responses of others, on recognition, praise, approval. When it came, you felt secure. When it didn't, you felt empty. Peale taught that this oscillation is a clear sign that identity is still externally supported. As long as the I am depends on the gaze of others, peace will always be unstable. Emotional dependency doesn't stem from moral weakness. It often arises from early experiences where love seemed conditional. You learn without realizing it that you need to please others to be accepted, that you need to adapt to avoid rejection. Over time, this logic transforms into identity. You don't just say, I need approval. You begin to live as if I am what others see in me. Peale firmly stated that no one can sustain a balanced life when they surrender their identity to the external world. He argued that self-validation is not arrogance, but emotional sanity. When you internally affirm, I am enough, something begins to reorganize itself. You still appreciate recognition, but you don't depend on it to exist in peace. This is an uncomfortable process at first. When you stop seeking validation, external silence can feel threatening. People may not react as they once did. Relationships based on dependency begin to change. But Peale taught that this discomfort is a sign of growth. You are taking the weight of your identity out of the hands of others and bringing it back to yourself. The I am acts here as an internal stabilizer. When someone walks away, you feel the pain, but you don't lose your footing. When you don't receive a response, you feel the frustration, but you don't dissolve. Because now there is an internal source of security. You don't need someone to confirm your existence to keep moving forward. Peale said that true emotional maturity begins when you stop demanding from others what only you can give yourself. When you become responsible for your inner state, your relationships change. They cease to be contracts for emotional survival and become conscious choices. You connect through affinity, not need. This change profoundly affects how you position yourself in the world. You speak more clearly. You set boundaries without guilt. You allow some people to distance themselves without interpreting it as personal rejection. The I am ceases to be a fragile identity that needs to be protected all the time. It becomes a firm center from which you relate. Peale emphasized that applied faith serves not only to overcome external challenges, but to heal internal patterns. Emotional dependency is one of those patterns. When you replace I need to be seen with I am whole, something is set free. You stop trading your essence for crumbs of attention. Over time, you realize that external validation was never as powerful as it seemed. It soothes for a moment, but it doesn't sustain. Self-validation, built by the I am, doesn't depend on circumstances. It grows with practice, with consistency between thought and action, with fidelity to oneself. This chapter marks an important turning point in the journey. You begin to walk with less emotional weight, not because you've become indifferent, but because you've become whole. And when that happens, paradoxically, your relationships tend to become healthier, not because you demand less from others, but because you demand more from yourself in terms of inner truth. When you stop depending on external validation and start relying on yourself internally, an inevitable test arises: failure. Norman Vincent Peale taught that how you interpret your mistakes is more decisive than the mistakes themselves. Most people are not defeated by failure, but by the identity they build from it. And it is precisely here that the I am reveals its true power. For a long time, you may have associated failure with being inadequate. A mistake wasn't just an event, but a silent confirmation that something was wrong with you. This association creates a deep fear of trying, because each attempt carries the risk of harming your identity. Peale was emphatic in saying that this is one of the greatest blocks to human growth. When you confuse what you do with what you are, any failure becomes an existential threat. The I am statement begins to reorganize this logic. When you internally affirm, I am someone who learns, failure ceases to be a final verdict and becomes a stage in the process. This doesn't eliminate the pain of error, but it prevents it from destroying your confidence. Peale taught that practical faith doesn't protect against falls, but it protects against self-destruction afterward. There comes a point when you realize you can no longer use mistakes as an excuse to give up. Not because you've become hard on yourself, but because you've become honest. The mature I am doesn't say I never fail. It says I am responsible for growing from what happens. This inner shift creates discipline, not a rigid, punitive discipline, but a discipline guided by clarity. Peale spoke about the importance of keeping your mind focused on the solution, not the problem. When you fail and spend days mentally replaying the mistake, you strengthen the problem. When you acknowledge the mistake, learn from it, and redirect your energy, you strengthen the solution. The I am acts as the point of choice between these two paths. Perhaps you're at a point where you feel you've failed yourself, that you promised something and didn't deliver, that you've reverted to old patterns. If so, this doesn't invalidate your journey. It reveals where your attention needs to be reinforced. Peale taught that real progress is rarely linear. It happens in spirals with advances, pauses, and resumptions. When you begin to use failure as raw material for inner discipline, something changes. You start to observe your behaviors with more curiosity and less judgment. Instead of asking yourself, "What's wrong with me?" you start asking, "What can I adjust?" This change in questioning changes the outcome. The discipline that springs from I am doesn't depend on constant motivation. It depends on identity. When you see yourself as someone committed to growth, you act even when you don't feel like it. Peale emphasized that consistency is more powerful than intensity. Small steps repeated with faith build solid results. Over time, you realize that many of the people who seem most confident are not those who have never failed, but those who have learned not to define themselves by failure. They fall, adjust, and move on. Affirm, I am, allows for exactly that. It creates an inner foundation that doesn't crumble in the face of error. This chapter marks the transition between believing and sustaining, between intellectually understanding and living it in practice. When you understand that failure doesn't threaten who you are, you become freer to act. And this freedom is one of the clearest signs of emotional and spiritual maturity. After you learn not to define yourself by failure, an even quieter challenge arises. Continuing to act when there is no enthusiasm, applause, or recognition. Vincent Peale taught that true inner strength is not revealed in moments of inspiration, but in the ability to remain true to your purpose when emotion wavers. It is here that I am ceases to be just an affirmation and becomes an operational principle of life. Many people believe they need to feel motivated to act. They wait for the right moment, the right feeling, the right impulse. Peale dismantled this belief by stating that action precedes emotion, not the other way around. When you act in alignment with who you choose to be, motivation arises as a consequence, not as a prerequisite. The mature I am doesn't say, I act when I feel good. It says, I am someone who acts because it reflects my values. This distinction changes everything. You stop being a hostage to your mood of the day and start operating from internal commitments. This doesn't eliminate tiredness, but it prevents it from determining your path. Perhaps you are going through a phase where no one notices your effort. You work, you try, you dedicate yourself, but the world remains silent. Peale taught that this silence is one of the most important tests of practical faith. It reveals whether your strength comes from external recognition or from internal conviction. When you affirm, I am faithful to my purpose, you don't need witnesses to continue. This kind of consistent action builds something profound: self-confidence. Every time you act despite a lack of enthusiasm, you internally reinforce the message that you can trust your decisions. This confidence isn't noisy, but it's stable. It doesn't depend on immediate results. Peale said that the mind needs to be trained to persevere. Just as the body strengthens with repetition, the mind strengthens with consistency. The I am functions as the axis of this consistency. When you repeat actions aligned with your chosen identity, you create internal coherence. And coherence generates peace. There are days when the will disappears, when everything seems heavy, when you wonder if it's worth continuing. These days are not signs of failure. They are invitations to maturity. When you continue anyway, you prove to yourself that your identity is not conditioned by comfort. Over time, you realize that many people give up not because of a lack of ability, but because of a lack of internal structure. They rely too much on emotion to sustain action. Peale taught that applied faith creates precisely this structure. It sustains action when emotion wavers. The I am here manifests as silent responsibility. You do what needs to be done because it reflects who you are, not because someone is watching. This attitude transforms your relationship with effort. It ceases to be a sacrifice and becomes an expression of character. This chapter reinforces something essential. You don't need to feel inspired to continue. You just need to be aligned. When I am becomes the center of your actions, consistency becomes natural. And this consistency over time creates results that no momentary burst of motivation can sustain. After learning to act consistently even without motivation or recognition, a more subtle stage of the journey emerges, dealing with uncertainty without losing one's center. Vincent Peale taught that one of the greatest sources of human suffering is not the difficulty itself, but the anxiety in the face of what cannot yet be controlled. When the I am is strengthened, it does not eliminate uncertainty, but completely transforms one's relationship with it. For a long time, you may have believed that you could only feel peace when everything was resolved, when there were guarantees, when the future was clear. Peale was direct in stating that this expectation is a mental trap. Life rarely offers absolute certainties, and waiting for them is to indefinitely postpone inner tranquility. The mature I am says something different. I am capable of remaining at peace even without all the answers. This statement is not resignation, it's confidence. When you live from that perspective, you stop wasting energy trying to predict every scenario. You learn to deal with the present with more presence and less tension. Peale taught that anxiety arises when the mind projects excessively into the future, without sufficient faith in its own inner resources. Uncertainty tests what you believe about yourself. If you see yourself as fragile, any doubt becomes a threat. If you see yourself as internally strong, doubt becomes merely an open space where something new can emerge. The I am redefines this space. It transforms emptiness into possibility. Perhaps you're at a stage in life where important decisions need to be made, but the path is not yet clear. This can generate fear, paralysis, or haste. Peale taught that none of these responses are necessary when there is inner confidence. You don't need to rush or freeze. You can move forward serenely, step by step. When I am becomes your anchor, you learn to trust the process. This doesn't mean passivity, but emotional flexibility. You act responsibly, but accept that not everything depends on you. This acceptance drastically reduces internal strain. You stop fighting reality and begin to cooperate with it. Peale spoke about the importance of deliberately cultivating peaceful thoughts, not as an escape, but as mental hygiene. Calm thoughts create clearer decisions. The I am at peace doesn't ignore problems, but prevents them from taking on unreal proportions within the mind. When you maintain this inner state, you realize that many worries naturally lose their power. Over time, you notice that people who radiate serenity aren't those with perfect lives, but those who have learned to trust themselves and something greater. They don't need to control everything to feel secure. The mature I am creates exactly that kind of stability. It allows you to navigate difficult periods without losing faith in your own path. This stage of the journey brings a silent yet profound change. You begin to sleep better. Your reactions become less intense. You respond instead of reacting. Uncertainty ceases to be a constant enemy and becomes a natural part of the growth process. Peale taught that true faith manifests itself most clearly in moments when there are no guarantees. When you choose to trust anyway, something within you is strengthened. You discover that peace does not come from the absence of problems, but from the presence of a firm identity. And that identity begins with I am. As inner peace settles in, one last attachment needs to be released, the need to be understood by everyone. Norman Vincent Peale observed that many people suffer not because they are wrong in their path, but because they expect universal approval. When the I am matures, this expectation begins to lose its meaning. For a long time, you may have tried to explain your choices, justify your feelings, prove your worth. This consumes energy and creates constant frustration. Peale taught that not everyone is prepared to understand your journey, and that's not a flaw in you. It's a reality of life. When you accept that, something is set free. The authentic I am doesn't need consensus. It sustains itself through internal coherence. When you live in alignment with your values, you don't need to convince anyone. Your presence speaks for itself. This shift reduces unnecessary conflicts and strengthens your emotional clarity. Perhaps you felt at some point that you were becoming different from the people around you, that your interests had changed, that your priorities had shifted. This can lead to loneliness, but Peale saw this process as a sign of growth. You're not distancing yourself from people. You're getting closer to yourself. When you stop seeking external understanding, your choices become more honest. You don't mold your decisions to please others. You act based on what you consider true. The I am here functions as a filter. It eliminates the need for emotional performance. Peale said that authenticity is one of the greatest sources of peace. When you stop living to be understood and start living to be true to yourself, life becomes simpler. Not necessarily easier, but more coherent. And coherence reduces suffering. This stage requires courage. Not everyone will accept your changes. Some will distance themselves. Others will try to pull you back to older versions of yourself. But when the I am is firm, these attempts do not destabilize you. You understand that each person is at their own stage of consciousness. Over time, something curious happens. The less you try to be understood, the more genuinely understandable you become. Not through explanations, but through presence. People sense when someone is internally aligned. This feeling generates silent respect. Peale taught that true influence comes from integrity, not persuasion. When you live from I am, you influence effortlessly. Your tranquility Your clarity and your consistency speak louder than any argument. This chapter marks an important final transition. You stop seeking intellectual or emotional validation. You allow yourself to be who you are, even if that doesn't please everyone. And this permission generates freedom. When you understand that you don't need to be understood to be right with yourself, you reach a profound level of maturity. The I am becomes silent yet solid. It doesn't ask for approval. It simply is. After abandoning the need to be understood and establishing oneself in one's own authenticity, something profoundly transformative happens. The I am ceases to be merely a conscious affirmation and begins to operate as a silent force that organizes one's life from the inside out. Vincent Peale taught that the greatest sign of spiritual and emotional maturity is not talking about faith, but living in such a way that it becomes invisibly functional. At this stage, you no longer feel a constant need to reaffirm your strength. It is present. Your decisions begin to reflect clarity. You don't react impulsively. You don't get lost in comparisons. You don't dissolve in the face of criticism. The I am becomes a stable internal structure, a base from which you observe, choose, and act. Peale said that a mind trained in practical faith develops a kind of balance that doesn't depend on favorable circumstances. This balance is not rigidity, but coherence. You begin to realize that many conflicts that previously drained your energy simply cease to make sense. Unnecessary arguments, constant proofs of worth, artificial urgencies, all of this loses its power when you no longer need to defend your identity. The mature I am creates inner order, and this order begins to be reflected externally. Your routine becomes more functional. Your priorities become clearer. You start saying no with less guilt, and yes with more awareness. Not because you've become indifferent, but because you've learned to respect your own energy. Perhaps you notice that your life hasn't become perfect. Problems still arise. Challenges continue to appear. But now they don't disrupt you internally. Peale taught that faith isn't about stopping storms, but about preventing them from destroying a person's core. When the I am is firm, you navigate difficult phases with greater emotional stability. This is a point where many people realize they've spent years trying to change the outside world, when true change needed to happen within. The I am doesn't change circumstances by force, but by alignment. When you change how you position yourself internally, the world responds differently. People naturally draw closer or move away. Paths adjust. The silent power of I am also affects your relationship with time. You stop living in a rush, trying to prove something. You start living in the present, building with consistency. Peale emphasized that excessive haste is a sign of inner insecurity. When you trust, you don't run, you move forward. This stage of the journey brings a sense of emotional sobriety. You don't depend on peaks of enthusiasm to feel alive. Your satisfaction comes from the daily coherence between thought, faith, and action. This creates a deep peace that doesn't need to be explained or displayed. Over time, you realize that your presence begins to impact others, not through speeches, but through your posture. People sense when someone is centered. This silent influence is a direct reflection of the integrated I am. You don't try to inspire, but you inspire. Peale believed that the greatest service one can render to the world is to become internally organized. A person at peace contributes more than someone in constant conflict. When you reach that point, you understand that your journey wasn't just about you. It was about becoming someone who walks with stability in an unstable world. This chapter represents consolidation. The I am is no longer an idea. It's a state, an axis, a discrete force that sustains your choices. And when that happens, life ceases to be a battlefield and becomes a space for conscious construction. Reaching this point in the journey doesn't mean you've achieved some kind of perfection. Vincent Peale never advocated that idea. What happens when you truly understand I am is something much simpler and deeper. You stop abandoning yourself. That is the true transformation. In this final stage, you realize that you spent a large part of your life searching for something outside that was always inside. Security, value, direction, peace. All of this seemed to depend on external factors. But now you understand that these qualities are born from how you define yourself internally. The I am ceases to be a tool and becomes your functional identity. You no longer spend your time asking who you should be. You spend your time simply being. This doesn't eliminate doubt, but it eliminates chronic confusion. You know where you are internally, even when the external world changes. This stability is rare, and therefore so valuable. Peale said that the greatest human freedom is inner freedom. When you don't depend on approval, when you're not governed by fear, when you're not defined by past failures, you become truly free. The I am is the declaration of that freedom. Perhaps you still face difficult days, moments of exhaustion, questioning, but now you don't interpret these moments as regression. You understand that they are part of the human experience. The I am doesn't promise a life without pain, but it offers a firm foundation to get through it without losing yourself. At this point, your faith has become practical. Not as a ritual, but as a stance. You trust more, you resist less, you act with more clarity. You don't feel superior to anyone, but you also don't feel inferior. There is a silent equality in the way you position yourself in life. Peale taught that when the mind is aligned with constructive thoughts and faith is active, a person becomes more receptive to solutions. You begin to perceive opportunities more clearly, not because they appeared out of nowhere, but because your perception has changed. The integrated I am allows you to stop living in function of the past or the future. You learn to honor the present, and the present becomes enough. This doesn't mean complacency, but presence. You build tomorrow without abandoning today. At the end of this journey, you understand something essential. It wasn't the world that needed to change first. It was the way you saw yourself in it. When that vision changes, everything else falls into place. That's Norman Vincent Peale's central teaching applied to real life. If someone were to ask what happens when you truly understand I am, the answer wouldn't be grand. It would be simple. You become more whole, more stable, more true to yourself. And that trueness changes everything. You don't need anyone to come and save you. You don't need constant signs. You don't need absolute guarantees. You become the support you've always sought. And from there, you walk with firmness even when the path is silent. This is the complete journey, not of someone who has become invincible, but of someone who has become conscious. And when that happens, life ceases to be a desperate search and becomes a natural expression of who you have chosen to be. This is the power of I am when finally understood, not as a concept, but as a lived truth. Getting this far shows you're willing to go beyond the superficial. By following this channel, you choose to stay in touch with content that strengthens your thinking, renews your faith, and supports real change. Subscribe and join us on this journey of conscious inner growth.